Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Sebi. Today we're going to be doing a tutorial for Mariposa. It is a design that is exclusive to my new book, Fat Quarter Workshop. It's one of the designs that was just released in that book. It wasn't previously a Stashing with Stephanie design, but it can be fat quarter friendly, and I'm actually going to use fat 8s for the version that I'm doing. There comes in two sizes. There's a twin and there is a crib, and the crib contains some alternate instructions on how to use those fat 8s so you can get more variety of fabric in there. We also have some kits available for this while supplies last using Tula Pink True Colors. We are using this geode print and then the Hexy, and then I'm using the Glacier Tula Pink Solid for the background because it's just a real nice minty color, and so it's not like you're plain white, it's not your plain gray, so it works really great for a background, and it coordinates obviously perfectly with Tula's fabrics. This pattern does include a little bit of paper piecing, so a few things that you might want to get for that beyond your regular sewing supplies are the add a quarter ruler. I have the 12-inch here. You'll see how I use this, but it's got a little lip on it, so it makes it really easy to trim down to those 1/4-inch seams after you've sewn. And some Carol Doak paper piecing paper is nice to have. It's not a must. You can use regular computer paper. Then obviously you need a copy of my book. So one quick note about that, if you're watching that when the video comes out, our first printing of the book sold out in less than 2 months, which is wild. Like, I never in my wildest dreams would have ever thought that that would have ever happened. So there are more coming, and they're expected in early January. So if you order from us, we're going to fill those orders in the order in which they're received. So get on the list, and we'll get it out as soon as we are able to receive those books in-house. We'll get them signed and shipped out. Otherwise, if you've already got the book, then you can just order the kit, or you can always go and have some fun with that. But we want to put it out here so that way you guys can get your name on that list. You could get it as soon as you can, and maybe this can be for any new baby that is coming up, or maybe a special little girl. This quilt is actually for my baby, who's almost a 1-year-old, and I'm sure my older daughter would like it as well because she loves butterflies. All right, so that's enough of the intro. Let's get to piecing. All right, so I'm going to start with paper piecing, because that's the more challenging bit, and if you like this and you think, yeah, I can do that, then this is a good one for you to give a go. So inside the book there are going to be templates for the bodies of the butterflies, and that's how we're going to create this cool top without having to buy a special ruler just for that. And there is a square on here that says it should measure 1 inch. This is important because if you're taking it to a copy shop or using a home scanner, you want to make sure that it's being reproduced at 100% and that this square continues to measure 1 inch after you printed it. Otherwise, the bodies are not going to fit once you attach your wings. So do pay attention to that. It's very, very important. Yours is going to look just a tad bit different from this. This is my original that I turned into the publisher. So today we're just going to make one of these because they're all the same in terms of how you do it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut out my A body because that is going to correspond with my piece here. Now, I did pay careful attention when I was cutting to make sure I was nice and straight going through all those hexagons, so that way it wouldn't look a little crooked when the body was on the rectangle. I really paid very close attention to that, and it was worth the extra step. When you're cutting this, you want to cut just beyond the lighter line, and that's going to be your seam allowance, and we're going to trim everything down to that later, but you want to make sure that you're not cutting right on that line because we'll do that at the end once everything's sewn up. All right, so when we are doing this, you're going to always sew on the printed side, but you're going to pin everything from the side that is not printed. So when you paper piece, the math is a little bit different. We give you a little bit extra fabric knowing that you're going to have to trim stuff off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay my piece over it, and you can see that it completely covers that paper, which is good. That's what we want to have happen. So I'm going to put some pins near the top. And I didn't make it through all the layers. You want to make sure you're making it through the paper layer because I want to pin this to the paper beneath to keep everything in place. Do the same thing on the bottom. Actually, I'm going to turn this one so that my point is going out. That way the head of my pin doesn't get in the way of everything that we have to do next. All right, so now we're gonna flip it over, and you can see that the pieces are numbered. So piece 1 is going to be the body, and 3, 4, and 5 are going to be the background that surrounds the body and makes those tips. So you're going to sew in order. So we're gonna do 2 and 3 here. So what I wanna do is I wanna take this and I wanna fold it along the line between piece 1 and piece 2. You can use a postcard or something to help you line that up. We're gonna flip it around and we're gonna do the same thing between piece 1 and piece 3. We're gonna do both of these at the same time. Now I need to get my cutting board out so that we can trim. So this is where the lip of that add a quarter comes in handy. What it does is you can line it up and it will stop once it hits that folded over piece. It provides enough tension to where it won't go any further. So that way you can easily line it up and trim to 1/4 of an inch, which gives you your guide for our next step. I'm gonna go ahead and do that on the other side as well. Now I want to fold these back open because we need to be able to see these when we are sewing. So I'm going to flip this back over and I pulled my pins back just a little bit so that way I'm nowhere near the seam allowance, because the next thing I have to do is sew. So I've got some of my background pieces here, and again they're oversized on purpose. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay it so that I've got a little bit hanging off the edge here on the long side and a lot hanging off over there. You can kind of preview and pull it back and make sure that it's going to cover the paper if you're at all concerned that it might not work out just right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to, you can pin this if you want, I typically don't. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this and I'm going to flip it over and hold it in place, and then I'm going to stitch from beyond that seam line on both sides. So I'm going to stitch between that line between 1 and 2, starting beyond and coming all the way down. And to do this, I'm going to reduce my stitch length to about 1.4 because we're going to be ripping that paper off when we're all done, and we don't want that seam to rip out along with it. So that's a good reason why you would want to maybe use some Carol Doak paper, because it is thinner. It's about the consistency of newsprint, so it rips a lot easier. One other tool that can be helpful, but that I must have with my other sewing machine at the shop, is an open toe applique foot. They're usually clear, and if you put that on your machine, you can see the line that you're stitching on a lot better. So I'm just going to grab this and I just hold it and flip it over. And you can kind of look into the light and see and make sure that everything looks like it's going to cover correctly, and it is on this one. So I'm getting everything nice and lined up, and I'm going to reduce that stitch length and go ahead and sew. All right, so I kind of want to go slow because I really want to make it through that point exactly on. When you're in the middle of the line, it doesn't matter as much, but at the beginning and end of the line, it does, because that's going to match with other things. So we want to go all the way through and just take your time, don't rush through it. All right, so I've got my first line stitched. Now I'm going to turn around and I'm going to do the same thing with the piece between 1 and 3. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my extra background sheet and I'm going to lay it out again. And again, if you need to, if this is new to you, you can always preview it by pulling it back a little bit to make sure it's going to cover in the layout that you've got it. I'm good here, so I'm going to go ahead and grab it. I just hold everything together, but you could pin it in place and then flip it over, bring it to my sewing machine, and we're going to repeat. All right, so a lot of people at this point, well, obviously you have to press, and a lot of people, instead of pressing with their iron, because it's a lot of up and down, you can remove your pins by the way, is they use what's called a seam roller. And Violet Craft, who puts out a lot of great paper piecing patterns, has come out with her version of one. This is kind of like a new old tool. What you do is you just kind of roll it like that, and you can flatten that seam out pretty good. You would still want to take an iron to it eventually, but you can see that that is staying over pretty well, as opposed to this, it doesn't want to flip over at all. So this is a really good tool if you don't want to do all that up and down. I also use it a lot when I'm working with my daughter, because I don't want her, she's only 6, I don't want her messing with my hot iron. So this is a good way that she can get involved and feel like she's part of the process and not constantly be like, well, no, mommy has to to do that section. So these are good tools to have if you like paper piecing or if you are working with kids sewing. All right, so now it's time to finish this up. It actually goes, like I said, it's pretty quick for the bodies. It's not hard. It's a good paper piecing project, but it allows us to get those really intricate points on the bodies. All right, so now we're going to repeat everything, but we're going to do it for the 4 and the 5 piece. So it's a little bit different because you're going to be ripping across this piece. So what you want to do is fold it over, and then the paper is going to rip where your seam was right here, and that's okay because we're going to rip it all off eventually anyway. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it more towards me so it's a little more ergonomic, and I'm going to go ahead and trim off, and you can see I'm also trimming off some of this background, and that's okay. It's well beyond what we're supposed to be doing. What you want to make sure that you always do is that you have folded this back, because otherwise you're going to have to try to tape it back in place, which is hard to do when you're also working with irons and things. For a piece like this, it wouldn't be the end of the world because it's just one little bit, but if it's a big thing where it's paper piece upon paper piece upon paper piece, then you might be in a little bit of trouble. Repeat on the other side. Now we've got something that looks really weird, but I promise it all comes together in the end. So what we're going to do is we're going to take and we're going to line it up again with our little background piece there. And again, you can always flip that back so you can preview and make sure it's looking good. It is. And I'm just going to hold these and bring it over, but you could always pin parallel to the seam that you're going to sew. All right, so technically we're done with the sewing for the body. I know this looks a little weird. We're about to trim it down. All right, so what you want to do here is you want to line it up so that the 1/4 inch mark is on that bold line. That is going to be the outside of your block, and the lighter line is going to be your outside of your seam allowance there. So I'm just going to trim that off, get it out of the way, flip it around, and do the other sides. All right, so it's time to flip it over and do the big reveal, and we have a beautiful little body that's going to look great in the middle of our butterfly wings. Now at this point you have a choice. You can remove the paper now, or you can wait to do it until your block is all together. The benefit to doing it now is it is easier to remove the paper because you are not going to add a bunch of seam allowances going all around there, which segments the paper into smaller and smaller chunks. But the benefit to waiting is all of these seams here are bias seams, and so if you decide to take it off, you need to take some extra care, because with those seams here, these are going to provide some extra stability to make sure that this doesn't warp and get all out of place when you're sewing. I'm going to go ahead and leave mine in and until we get all of our block together so that we have a nice straight body, and I know it's going to stay the size it's supposed to. So there are 3 different sizes of butterfly wings that we're going to make the 3 different sizes of butterflies. All that information is in Fat Quarter Workshop, and that is a book, and it comes with 12 patterns, all Fat Quarter friendly, and in this case also Fat 8th friendly. So I'm going to start by drawing a line from corner to corner on the wrong side of these background squares. And I'm just going to take my add a quarter ruler because I've got it handy. And I'm just going to line that up. And when you're doing this, it is really important to do 2 things. 1, to make sure you're lined up with the exact tip, and 2, that you line your pen up and angle it so that it is in contact with the ruler. If you go straight up and down like this, then you're going to be just the side and you're not going to get accurate results. And a lot of times what I see people do when we were able to sew in person is they would be just a little bit off when they were going to their corner, and your mind doesn't compensate for that. You don't think, oh, I'll just get to it when I'm sewing. You just follow the line. And so you want to make sure that you are taking accurate steps at this point to make sure you're drawing a line from point to point exactly into that point. I like to use a friction gel pen for these. It will go away with heat, but a pencil would be just fine as well. Just make sure it's got a fine tip like a mechanical pencil. You would not want to use an ink pen because that could bleed onto your fabric someday when you wash it. So I chose, when I was laying mine out, to have mirror image so that way the bottoms and the tops of the wings matched on the outsides. So what you want to do when you're thinking about that is think about where you're going to place everything. So for this one, I've got my hexagons going sideways, and for the most part, because I took some time when I cut this, the hexagons are going even and parallel to each other, so you can see that they're kind of hitting at the same spot on the bottom and on the top. So if I were to just you know, stack these up and put it together and sew all of them to the sides here, eventually I would flip this over and then everything wouldn't be nice and lined up anymore. Now that's a detail that if you are a newbie, don't even worry about it. But if you are trying to bring your quilt to the next level and really have a level of thought go into it where everything is nice and aligned and you're not looking at that block and going, why does it look off? Because, you know, we flipped it over and now the things don't line up. This is something that you should think about when you're laying things out. So what I did when I was doing all my blocks together is I stacked them all up in sets of 2 like this and making sure that they matched and that everything was in alignment. And then what I did was I aligned my wings so that they were in the opposite corners. And so now, as long as I make sure to keep these stacks in order, I'm going to be able to, when it's all said and done, bring it back over and have them line up, because if I flip them at this point, everything still stays nice and lined up because they both rotated in the same direction. If that just blew your mind and you have no idea what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. Just sew wherever you need to sew on opposite corners and it'll be okay. But if you want to try to up that, this is how to do it. Lay everything out, make it nice and tidy, and then start sewing. So what I'm going to start doing here is I'm just going to sew down this, and what you're going to do is sew exactly on the line or just one needle width to the right of the line on that seam side, because we're going to cut this off. What you don't want to do is sew to the left of the line, then that will give you too small of a block. So either right on or just to the side, and we are ready to go. So for this entire section so far, we've kept our needle in the center position of our sewing machine, and if you wanted to do this with an applique foot, you could as well, so you can see that line a little bit better. I'm going to take these off for right now because first I'm just going to focus on sewing my outside corners. Also remember to increase that stitch length back to whatever standard for your machine. I like to sew at 2 or 2.5. So now I've got these laid back out, and eventually we're going to cut off those corners, but I'm going to go ahead and sew the other corners on first so we can do all those steps at the same time. And remember, we're just going to be sewing in opposite corners, and if you're going to try and do it where you're trying to get everything all matchy-matchy, I highly recommend that you lay everything out like this again to make sure that you have everything orientated the way you want it, and then you'll be good to go. Since this is such a small square, I haven't pinned any of them, but if you're having trouble keeping it in place, what you can do is get everything lined up and then just put your pin in through the center like that, and that'll hold it in place enough, and then you can make small adjustments as you're sewing to keep your edges in line. So now we're going to take just our regular ruler and line the 1/4 inch mark up on top of the seam that we sewed, and just go ahead and trim that so that we have a 1/4 inch seam. These are very small. I'm sure there are scrap savers who keep them. I certainly do not. So I'm going to press these seams open. It's incredibly important to press your seams open for this block because it is a lot of seams that are going to be coming together. It's with that paper piecing. So we want it to be as flat as it possibly can be. Once I am done from that side, I usually go from the right side as well, just to get it super, super flat. Well, I'm just doing one block for this video. I highly recommend that you chain piece and you do all these steps at the same time. If you want to do one block as a test ahead of time to see how it goes, that's fine, but it's going to save you so much time if you do this all at once. All right, so now I've got my butterfly wings all done and ready to go. So I'm going to show you how to pin these together so that way we can get these guys sewn together and ready to go in the quilt. All right, so we're just going to flip these right sides together. And when you look at it from above, you can see that those seams are going right on top of each other, which is what we want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a pin and I'm going to put it in the right side of that seam allowance, because that's the seam side we're going to come to second when we sew. So what I'll do is I'll line up these points when I put it under the machine, and I'll sew until I hit here, and I'll leave my needle down and only then pull this pin, because the needle holding down is going to act like a pin and keep everything together so we have great joints. Then I'll keep going the rest of the way. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, then we're going to start sewing. All right, so now I'm finally going to move that over to my 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we're going to take it over and start sewing. All right, so I'm coming up to that seam allowance, so I'm gonna stop with that needle down as close to the pin as I can get. I'm gonna go ahead and pull that out, and then I just line up my points and I'm gonna sew down. And when I can't hold that in place anymore with my pointer finger, I move it to the side. And that allows me to maintain that 1/4 inch stitch all the way down. I see a lot of people have trouble with that. It gets a little wonky at the beginning and end, mostly at the end, and it's because of that. All right, so I'm gonna press these seams open as well. It'll really help that block lay nice and flat. What you wanna do is make sure you're lifting and pressing so you're not hitting any of those little seams going in the wrong direction. We'll do the same with the other side. All right, so if you're looking at this at home, you're gonna be like, Stephanie, you're way off on your top one. I totally cut it to the wrong size when I was cutting my square. So we all make mistakes, and I'm just gonna roll with it for the rest of the video because this is not going in the actual quilt. I would totally fix that if I were gonna do it for the actual quilt. It's good for you to know that I make mistakes too, because I know a lot of you guys are like, you make it look so easy. I screw up too. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna show you how to sew this together and how to pin it up, and I'm gonna show you on this side because this side's gonna be a little off, but this side we can get right on. So this is another reason why it's good to leave that paper on. When I flip it over, I'm gonna have a exact guide of where that point is gonna meet for that 1/4 inch seam. So what I can do is I can take my pin and I can put it right in where that point is, and I wanna make sure that it's coming out past that area where the fold is there. So I've got that in. And now I want to eyeball about a 1/4 inch away on this seam here. So let me go ahead and do that. And I want my pins or my sides here to be nice and even, which they are here. And so now I'm going to go ahead and hold that, pinch it so that the needle is going straight up and down, and then pin with the second pin going across. And what that'll do is it'll make sure that those points are as close as they possibly can be without having to paper piece the entire block. So that'll be really, really helpful. I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing on the other side, and then we're gonna sew. So since I'm going to be sewing through paper again, I'm going to want to reduce that stitch length to that 1.4 or 1.6, so that way it's easier to tear this off in the end and we won't compromise that seam. You want to sew as close to that pin as you can and then remove it to help keep that in place as long as possible. Time for a little moment of truth where we see how that turned out, and oh, that is a good join. I'm very, very happy with that. I think that looks fantastic. We're a little off here, but we are right on over here, and this is close enough. I'm not gonna mess with that. I'm gonna call that good. All right, I'm gonna press this open and we'll sew the other side on, and then we are all done. If you wanted to, at this point, you could tear off this inner seam. It'll make it a little easier to tear off at the end if you are taking that out as you go, because at this point, really, it's only this top seam that needs to stay intact for when we are attaching the sashing when this is all done. All right, so I'm carefully just lifting and pressing, working my way down. There are a lot of seams here. Yep, we had a little piece come off. That's okay if it does. All right, so I'm gonna repeat everything on the other side. Remember, I said mine a little funky, so it's not gonna be perfect, but that's okay for this tutorial. Again, if it were for the quilt, I would go back and fix it. Now, whenever I have a block that has this many seams, really for every block, what I like to do is hit it with my spray mister. I don't like to put water in my iron because I don't want it to spit or get nasty, and I've had it for like 4 years and it's still going strong, so I want to keep it that way. So I use this instead. When you spray it, it creates a fine aerosol mist, so you don't get water droplets on your fabric. These are available on Amazon. We'll put an affiliate link in to the video description down below. Then I can take my iron and I can just go over that and get it super flat, which is gonna make it really easy to join all that sashing on and get the rest of our quilt top together. Well, that's it. We've got our cute little butterfly block. There are 3 different sizes that you're going to make, but they all go together the same way. There's gonna be different size bodies and different size wings. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Remember, the pattern is in my book, Fat Quarter Workshop. We are currently out of stock because the first printing sold out so quickly, which is just nuts. But the next one should be arriving in early January. January. And so if you order from us and do that pre-order, as soon as they arrive, I'll get them signed for you and personalized, and we'll get them out the door to you. And then you'll be able to make this happen. And at the time that I'm filming this, we do have the Tula Pink fabric in stock where you can get kits for this. I don't know if we'll reorder, so go ahead and grab it while you can, and then you can make a cute little baby quilt for a little baby in your life. This is my daughter, almost 1-year-old daughter's baby quilt, so I'm excited that she's almost old enough to use it. All right, thank you so much for following along. As always, if you've enjoyed these tutorials and you want to give it a go, we love it if you say thanks by getting the supplies you need from us. Of course, you need to get the pattern from us, but you can get the fabric from us as well. And also make sure you're subscribed to the channel so that way you can get free video tutorials every week from us. Thanks so much for following along. Until next week, happy quilting.